think like we're starting to see a lot more folks kind of look out and say like, hey, well, like, are we still using like the best available technology? And it's like, I think that's a bit more natural. Like software goes in cycles, and I think we're reaching one of those changing of the guard moments. Probably the more exciting one though is like, what is AI doing to like help evolve the BI landscape, and how is that changing everyone's plans for the next 5 years? I think the biggest evolution you're going to see is that like having people just build and manage dashboards as data teams, I think is going to become pretty obsolete pretty quickly. It won't happen like fast, but it will happen like quicker than we think.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Tycoon Talks, the open exchange. This is our monthly deep dive with top industry leaders, where we explore what's happening in the world of data, what's shaping the future of data, innovation, and the systems that move our world. Tycoon Talks is all about open dialogue, fresh perspectives, and real-world insights. Whether we're talking data infrastructure, cutting-edge tools, or bold ideas driving transformation, our goal is to spark meaningful conversations and leave you with something actionable to take back to your teams. We're so excited to have you here. Let's get into it. Today, we're taking a closer look at Lightdash, a modern business intelligence tool built specifically for the dbt ecosystem. Lightdash makes it easy for teams to turn dbt models into powerful, shareable insights without needing to write custom code for every chart or dashboard. It's designed for speed, simplicity, and collaboration, bridging the gap between analysts and business users. As data teams continue to shift towards more modular, warehouse-native workflows, tools like Lightdash are becoming essential for keeping insight generation nimble and user-friendly. And joining us today is Hamzah Chaudhary, co-founder and CEO at Lightdash, to share the story behind the product and what is next for BI in a dbt-powered world. Did I get the pronunciation right?
You did, you nailed it.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. So, Hamzah, welcome. Can you start by telling us what inspired the creation of Lightdash and how does it differentiate itself from traditional BI tools?
Yeah, of course. So first off, super happy to be here. And to talk a little bit about Lightdash's inception story needs a little bit of background on my own personal sort of career. So I started life as a software engineer and sort of moved into the world of data and analytics. At the last company I was at, I was responsible for kind of building and managing our data pipelines, which also meant managing our data analytics and analytics engineering teams. Actually, this was prior to analytics engineering being a term. So it was just data analysts and almost like pre-DBT. The thing that I noticed was that our data teams were not operating like software teams. So software teams for the last 20 years have benefited from all these amazing sort of creations and inventions in our space, everything from Git to version control to being able to work collaboratively and all these sort of frameworks that mean engineers have superpowers that nobody else seemed to have. When I moved over to the data side, it was kind of like the Wild West. The ability to version control things or even just like manage things as code didn't exist in the BI layer. And that was really frustrating for me as a technical practitioner. And so Lightdash was really born out of my own frustration as a data person who really wanted things to feel more programmatic. So I wanted it to feel like a developer workflow. It happened to come at the right time, like around the same time as DBT starting to like really pick up steam, and kind of floated this idea for an analytics engineer and this idea of analytics engineering workflow that is the like parallel of what a software development lifecycle is, but for data. And so Lightdash was really built for that persona and that user. And the idea being that everything is sort of available as code, works really natively with all the tools that you're probably already using, things like DBT. And then most importantly, it's open source. So the idea is that like folks can contribute back to the product. You can self-host it and run it yourself. And it's meant to sort of be very open and collaborative, which is kind of the opposite of what I think most BI tools tend to really lock down everything that you can do in them. And we kind of wanted to change that paradigm a bit.
Yeah, we love open source here at Database Tycoon, obviously. And how do you see Lightdash evolving in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like a year ago, that question was easier to answer. And now with like all the advances in sort of the AI technologies in the last like 12 months, maybe even the last 3 months has kind of changed our roadmap a lot. I think the thing that is still true when we started Lightdash was that we wanted BI to be more than a passive insights platform. If you speak to most people when they talk about BI tools, it is often like the most expensive tool, firstly, that people are normally buying as part of their data stack. Like it's one of the high ticket items, but it often is associated with being a cost center in a business. So most people will say like it's a cost line item. It doesn't generate revenue directly, like, but we have to have one. And we kind of thought about like, well, how can you change that paradigm a little bit and make it more of like an actions platform rather than an insights platform? And so a lot of the work that we're doing in Lightdash now, including how we're incorporating AI technology into it, is really around how can you take people from just deriving insights to actually performing an action. So a really simple example is like somebody built like a dashboard to try and figure out customers at risk of churning inside their company. And what they really wanted to do was, now that you've got that list, be able to trigger like a HubSpot campaign or notify the CS reps or whoever it is directly from the BI tool. And so those are the sorts of things that I'm really excited about, because it sort of takes BI from being a cost center to a profit center. I think that's like pretty fundamental and a bit of a different way to approach BI kind of like as an area.
Yeah, absolutely. And for teams considering switching to Lightdash, what are the main, if there's any, what are the main barriers to adoption and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think this is, some of it is like not unique to Lightdash. It's probably like every BI tool has this. I call it like tool fatigue at this point, where in companies where people are, it's like the people problem of being like, like not another tool. As much as I love Lightdash, I think it's a fantastic tool and easy to use. I fully empathize with end users who are kind of being like thrown into lots of different UIs all the time. So that's like probably the real problem that I think every BI tool faces, and Lightdash isn't immune to it. I think the way that we think about how to mitigate that is it's actually kind of simple. It's that like, don't force people to use the tool who shouldn't be. What I mean by that is like, there's lots of good reasons for people to go into a BI tool, open up an app and like open up a dashboard and start building it. But there are also lots of reasons where you just want that information where you're already doing your work. So in Lightdash, for example, we have this really well-built Slack app, which you can call in Slack and say like, hey, give me the metrics or whatever number or whatever dashboard you're looking for, like directly in Slack. The user never has to leave the place where they're already working. So for us, that's like, it's a lot about like putting data where people are working rather than forcing them to come into your platform. And I think that's like, the last 10, 15 years of BI has all been about trying to get people to use your UI. But I just don't think that's how work is happening anymore. So you need to be able to integrate into all the places where people are working. That's probably like the one, there's probably like many other barriers, but that's the one that I think about the most. And I think is like quite fundamental to like what stops people from adopting any BI tool, is like that tool fatigue problem.
Yeah, tool fatigue is real.
Yeah.
Chisholm, you want to jump in?
Yeah, more specifically, so you mentioned how Lightdash kind of was born like from a need to be able to incorporate engineering principles into the BI tool. How do you solve the balance really between ensuring that your tool is technical enough for users like you who have software engineering backgrounds to enjoy, and also easy enough really for stakeholders who may want to self-serve but they're not technical to actually use the tool? Have you been able to solve that problem and create the balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think this comes down to, I call it like opinionation in software. So in Lightdash, we kind of have like a very clear delineation between the things that should be done by a technical member of the team. So if you are a member of the data team and you're used to working in DBT and all these kind of concepts are really useful to you, then writing as code, working locally in a terminal and using GitHub, all that sort of stuff is very natural. If you're somebody as an end user who maybe like has never heard of any of these data tools, you're like, what is a snowflake? I don't get it. Like that is, your world is very different. And so we have like a very strong opinion about the sorts of actions someone should be able to do through the UI, which is sort of like click, drag and drop. And those should feel very intuitive, versus things that you can do more programmatically as code. So for example, you can't, build a totally new data model in the UI because that implies that you're actually more technical than you might be. So the idea is by being opinionated over what you can and can't do, you can make the user experience amazing, because it's like, hey, these are like the 30 things you can do as an end user in the UI, and like this is your world that you can live in, and it's kind of giving people guardrails. Then you have these like, really, really nice happy paths for end users to follow and self-serve. And then if you end up doing something far more technical where you're like, hey, like we're actually doing something like far more technical, I'm rebuilding some of the data models under the hood or writing some really crazy custom SQL, that's actually where then as a developer, you want the benefit of all the power of your developer tooling. And that's where you kind of switch into, I call it like dev mode. So Lightdash has these two explicit modes, whether you're in dev mode or if you're in like explorer mode.
Okay, amazing. More specifically around open source here. I know your tool is an open source tool. So do you have a platform or a way that you listen to users? For example, what are the features that the users want to see? Is there something like that that is available, and have you been able to like maybe prioritize and you're adding of features to the tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have like a long history with open source. Just being any software engineer in the world knows like why tools should be open sourced. The reason why I wanted to make Lightdash open source was because of the problem that you just mentioned, which is we wanted to be transparent with people about features, priority, roadmap, all that sort of stuff. So since the first day of Lightdash, we've had a public roadmap, and it's still available like on our website, even on our GitHub repo, where you can see all the features that we're currently working on, what we're planning on working on, and even like you can go in and vote and comment and like leave requests for some of the features they're working on around how you might want it to work or a new use case that you want us to kind of capture. So we do that a lot. And I think like pretty much every feature in Lightdash's history has come through some request from a customer, either telling us about a problem or asking for a very specific like request they have. It's a huge part of the tool. We have a Slack community as well for a lot of our open source users kind of come in there and kind of give us a lot of feedback.
That's amazing. That's a very good way to ensure that the tool you're building is actually solving like really real life problems that people may be experiencing. I'm going to move a bit into the future of BI tools. We have new BI tools evolving like every day and showing up. How do you see the landscape changing? What do you say?
Yeah, so I think there's probably like a couple of things that are happening, and maybe there's like two forces at play at the moment. One is I think there's a bit of a natural like gap in the market in the last few years, particularly in the BI space, because if you look at like the biggest players of the last sort of 5 or 10 years, like the Lookers, the Tableaus, Power BI, probably a few others I'm missing, a lot of them have sort of now been acquired and kind of like pulled into bigger, Tableau went to Salesforce, Looker went to Google. I think there was Redash went to Databricks, and there's a couple others. So I think like we're starting to see a lot more folks kind of look out and say like, hey, well, like, are we still using like the best available technology? And it's like, I think that's a bit more natural, like software goes in cycles. And I think we're reaching one of those changing of the guard moments. Probably the more exciting one though is like, what is AI doing to like help evolve the BI landscape, and how is that changing everyone's plans for the next 5 years? I think the biggest evolution you're going to see is that like having people just build and manage dashboards as data teams, I think is going to become pretty obsolete pretty quickly. It won't happen like fast, but it will happen like quicker than we think. I think the reason for sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, why do you think so?
Yeah, so Lightdash maybe this also leads into Lightdash's approach to kind of AI tooling. So I'm a big believer in like AI as like an amazing way for non-technical users and people to self-serve. But again, going back to this problem of like guardrails, if I gave like an AI model access to the full data warehouse and all the schema inside of it, I guarantee you're not going to get the answer you're looking for as an end user if you ask it a question, because the schema just has so much sort of like knowledge packed into it that hasn't been structured. And that's kind of where tools like dbt and Lightdash really help. So Lightdash has this concept of a semantic layer, which is the idea that you're kind of defining all your metrics and dimensions as code, but it's like one layer of abstraction above your schema. If you have that, what we found with our sort of AI features internally is that the accuracy of the answers is an order of magnitude compared to doing like text to SQL. And so if you take that same thought and like extrapolate it like a little bit, and this might be a little bit of a wild like hot take, but it's kind of like, well, if you knew that you could ask a question and get the same answer every time immediately, why would you ever build a dashboard? Because I could just ask for the question every time I want it. The answer is, the reason why you want a dashboard, by the way, is that like people like predictability. So people just like having dashboards. I think we're used to them, and I think they will still stay. But I think the job of the data team will evolve from being like dashboard builders to actually focusing a lot more on just the underlying data models. Like, how do we build the best set of data models that enable the best self-serve experiences? And I think if you speak to most data teams now, they would love to be doing that, but the majority of their time is actually spent building dashboards and reports because end users can't do it themselves for lots of different reasons, tool reasons, data reasons, like all of it.
just kind of empower the teams to work on the data side of things, and then automatically the dashboards just give the results that you want.
That'd be
Still
amazing,
on
right?
Yeah, definitely. Still on the BI landscape, if you could change one thing about how companies approach BI tooling today, I mean, you probably have to like consult with companies who are trying to like adopt Lightdash. What's one thing you're seeing that you're like, oh, this is a problem, you need to nip it in the bud? What will you change about their approach to BI tools today?
That's a good question. I think if I have to think about that one for a second. I think like when I speak to companies most, I mean, I think most companies like want to work in a better way. I honestly think a lot of the problems come from the way existing BI tools have worked. And maybe I'll explain this a little bit. Most BI tools for the longest time have relied on keeping your data inside their platform. And that's how you keep the customer, right? Like you lock in all the sort of the semantic knowledge of your data inside whatever BI tool you're using and whatever format they ask you to use. And then that's kind of like where you're locked in. Obviously, that's great because it means it's going to be very difficult for you to leave. But it also has this other downside that you can't use the data anywhere else. Like, you can't use that knowledge that you've put into the BI tool normally into like other surfaces. And so I think the thing that I would love to see more is like, I think people thinking about how to build data models that have like a true single source of truth. So the source of truth lives in one place and that can easily be moved to other tools. So, right. So if you decide to use Lightdash and one day you leave and you decide you want to use another BI tool, ideally that shouldn't be a painful process. That sounds weird for me to say because, we obviously want people to stay. But I think there's actually more benefit to being an open platform that sort of integrates with lots and lots of different tools rather than being like a very closed source platform and then using that as kind of like a vendor lock-in. Yeah, I don't know if that's like the kind of answer you were expecting, but that's what came to mind when you asked me the question.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually like a good answer. And a follow-up to that is, I mean, you obviously already are adopting that approach for Lightdash, giving Lightdash the opportunity to incorporate with other tools in that way. What has your churn rates looked like for your customers? I mean, if they have that option, really.
Yeah, do you know what? We've actually lost nobody we've never lost a customer who said like, I'm leaving because your platform was too open. And they're like, we need to like go somewhere else. So I think like, has the result of being an open platform affected churn? I think no. Like I'm 100% certain like that hasn't been a reason that it would like affect churn. Generally, like Lightdash customers, I think for the most part they're pretty happy. I'm sure you might be able to find some and talk to them as well. But yeah, I think like the open platform thing for us is working more than it isn't, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Moving a bit around the guardrail things. I mean, we're in the AI era where everybody wants to incorporate AI into almost everything they do. I found some companies who are a bit skeptic about like privacy when it comes to like use of AI, and also what's the balance there? Or have you been able to like solve that really with Lightdash that already leverages AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think some of this is like, I think part of this is just because it's so new, people are unsure of how to approach it. So default human behavior is be very conservative and try to send as little data as possible. I think over time you'll find that people will get more comfortable with kind of sharing more and more data with these LLMs. And I think the LLM providers and the platforms will kind of figure out how to make that quite easy. Today with Lightdash, the way it works is relatively straightforward. We don't send the data itself to any like model providers that we work with. What we instead do is we rely on like the metadata. So we look for like column names, we look at like metadata descriptions, that sort of stuff. And that's the kind of information that we use inside the models. And so generally, like, we work with some pretty data sensitive industries. Like we have a lot of healthcare companies. We work with a lot with like insurance and that sort of stuff. And they all seem to be okay with that sort of a setup. And again, the key there is the data itself is not going. You're mainly just sharing like metadata. And I think that tends to be the best approach. Unless you're using like standalone models that you have full control over that are privately deployed, I think like that seems to be the common path today.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think AI can make BI tools like Lightdash obsolete in the future?
Oh man, I love this question. Yeah, I think they can and they can't. I think there's like a little bit of both. So I think that BI tools in a few years from now will look very different to what they look like today. So I think, like we just said, the idea of like a tool that is just all it does is build dashboards and then you consume those dashboards and you send them to people in PDFs. I think that 100% is going to go away. And I think it's going to be replaced with something that's far more dynamic, far more interactive, and far more plugged into lots of different places. So I think like those are the kind of the things that you'll see changing. So I think like, yes, AI as an interface for creating charts and asking questions will become the norm. I think the second thing is BI tools will have to be far more integrated into tools that companies are using. So whether it's like Notion or Slack or Confluence or whatever it is, I think what people will expect is to have the BI functionality in place. So like when you're in Slack or if you're in Notion, you should be able to just say like, how much money do we make last week? And immediately get like a dashboard shown to you or a chart like where you are. And I think that's the way BI is going to start going. So like, will it make Lightdash obsolete? Hopefully not, because we want to keep up with the times, but like, will it change BI? Like 100%.
Definitely. And I definitely agree with that. I feel like just working in consulting, one of the things I've seen stakeholders ask a lot is, this insight I'm seeing on the dashboard, can I just get it in Slack at this time every morning or something? So definitely that's one thing there. Moving a bit really more deeply into Lightdash here. You had mentioned earlier how we've moved a lot from the traditional Power BI, Lookas, Tableau. What would you say is some selling points that Lightdash have above these tools? If, for example, you were trying to convince a company who has used Power BI for the longest time, how do you bring them on board?
Yeah, so I think luckily now it's quite like an easy sell for most of those tools when folks meet Lightdash, but I hope so at least. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn there. But I think there's probably there's a couple things. I think one is the developer workflow that I mentioned at the beginning. It's just so powerful. I think that if you are someone who, as a data team member, you are used to like working in code and you're used to like using an IDE, like being able to leverage all the things that you want to have. So, like automated content validation. So we check for like if things are broken, we can like spin up preview, staging, production environments, like all those sorts of things that really make up a software engineer's toolkit being available inside the BI layer, I think is just such a fundamentally different way to think about it. And it's so refreshing when people try it out for the first time. I think they're like, okay, like this feels really nice. It feels like a workflow. It doesn't feel like an app that I'm trying to set up with lots of clicking. I'm actually able to like use it like I would a code editor. I think that's one for the data team. The other flip side of it is for the end users, like for the folks who are downstream of the data team, like how does their life get better? I think it's the things that we've talked about today around, I think of self-serve as like there's different layers of self-service. Maybe like the most passive way to self-serve is what you just described, where someone says like, hey, just send me this report every Monday morning in Slack. And like, that's my interaction with the BI tool. And then as you kind of get more and more technical, you have like folks who are like, I want to, change some filters on a dashboard. And then the next level is like, I want to create my own reports. And then the next level up from that is like, I'm going to write my own custom SQL queries. And like the tool has to be able to flex up and down for each one of those personas inside a company. And I think the way Lightdash works is we try not to cram it all into one tool. That's kind of where these different workflows come in. So we talked about the developer workflow. There's also like a Slack workflow. Then there's like a UI workflow. And each one of those is very like personalized to what we think that persona is trying to do. And I think that's why people enjoy using it versus, having a tool that's trying to do everything for everybody all at once with one big workflow could often become overwhelming.
Definitely. I'm going to add to that really interesting story. We had this one some years back. I had this client at a company and really we're trying to make a decision between two BI tools. And it turned out to be a very interesting back and forth between the stakeholders wanting something that was very familiar to Excel and the data team really wanting something that it felt like was more intuitive. And we did this interesting thing where we had to like out like all the like what do you need? You want to be able to easily like create a chart and then having to like make them like pick a poll. And then at the end of the day, we made a decision on that. Yeah. And I feel like one of the things that exercise made me realize is that there's a tendency really for maybe upcoming BI tools to move away from familiarity in a bit to be like more modern and move away from familiarity. So, has Lightdash been able to create a bit of a balance so that even as we add like all of these workflows, it doesn't feel too far from what people may be more familiar with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I mean we're always working on it, but I think we're getting close to it. And I think like there are some workflows that, like you said, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. And I think we've tried to keep some of those. So, some level of familiarity with what people are used to coming from some of the tools that I mentioned. But at the same time, like, yes, you have to empower people to be able to do the things that they want. So actually, you mentioned spreadsheets. Like one of the earliest feature requests of Lightdash was like, can you export this to Excel or can you export this to Google Sheets? And so what we did was, rather than building the feature just to say like, here's a CSV, we were like, well, how do we make it better? Like, how do you make it like more interesting? And so what we do in Lightdash is, if you export data to a spreadsheet, you can actually set it up as like a live connection. So the data gets sent to a Google Sheet or to Excel, and then you can also say like, refresh the data in the spreadsheet every hour, every day, whatever it is. And like, those are the kinds of ways that we try to like embrace both the past and like, what we think like modern looks like. It's like, you kind of have to meet people where they are. But yeah.
Before we go into like rapid fire and maybe bring on Stephen if he has any other questions. Have you seen, I mean, for people who want to adopt Lightdash, do you think that they usually would need like a solid data team? Would they need like consultants to help, or how easy is it for people to just really adopt the tool specifically for Lightdash?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as a BI tool itself, I think it's like pretty intuitive and companies can get up and running with it. But I think like, we work with partners and they're great, and they do a fantastic job of helping people. I think like BI tool migrations mask so much complexity because you think you're switching from one tool to another, but actually there's like a whole organizational change that usually comes along with it. And I think that cultural, like the human element of it, is the reason why partners are so valuable, because they're just experts at like helping human beings move from like one tool to another and make that like a soft landing. And so, like I mentioned earlier, that kind of like dealing with tool fatigue, dealing with like orchestration of moving, all that sort of stuff, I think that's where partners become super helpful. But we have a pretty good mix. We have folks who like come in and they get started themselves, and we never speak to them, and they just pick up the tool and they start using it, and it's great. Similarly, we have some folks who come to us and they work with some pretty fantastic consulting partners, and it just, I think it changes company to company. I wish there was like a one size fits all answer, but I don't think there is there.
Very contextual. I'm gonna move it over to Steven.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in with a quick question, sort of a follow up on that. One thing I'm curious about is, how often do you find customers start with the open source core and then use that as something to move into your paid product? And maybe could you even speak a little bit about that offering and what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lightdash Cloud, which is essentially the commercial offering of the open source product, that's a pretty common pathway for us. Like I would actually say that most of our, like a lot of our largest customers came through that pipeline, where like large enterprises who self-hosted and got started that way, and then kind of ran their own POCs with the self-hosted software, and then at some point decided to flip over to the cloud version and kind of get the benefit of the additional features. We didn't plan for this, but it ended up becoming a bit of a superpower when it came to doing POCs and that sort of stuff, because lots of companies would say like, we've got this like huge InfoSec hurdle to overcome before we could even start to POC the tool. We would tell them about the open source, and they could self-host Lightdash, and we would meet a company on Monday, have a POC spun up on Tuesday, and that's pretty unheard of in like the SaaS BI world where you can move that quickly. And so by the time you finish the proof of concept, like the team is already so into the tool that it kind of become like procurement and doing the rest of the sale becomes like quite natural. And then it just becomes a case of like, how do we get this into everyone's hands now? The cloud platform itself is, the self-hosted version. I always tell people like, we didn't want to make it like a faux open source where like you couldn't really use it unless you paid us some money. So it is like a great BI tool, and that's kind of what it does really well. I think the cloud version and the sort of paid features really come into their own when you start thinking about companies that are scaling really fast. So it has lots of things that help with governance, things that help with performance around things like caching and all that sort of stuff that the folks start needing when you start pushing the envelope of how much you're doing with the BI layer. And then a lot of the AI features that we've been talking about, a lot of those like sit inside the cloud platform as well. So like, but we always have this balance, and I think it's always like an internal like product struggle between like, should we make this open source or should we make it commercial? But we think it's like it works pretty well at the moment. But yeah, it's a really good funnel for us. We love open source, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, no, that's great to
And
hear. I mean, it's one of the things as a consultant, for Chisholm and I, if we can show a user what the tool is going to look like and feel like before they have to commit any spend, I personally think that there's a much higher chance that they'll eventually want to purchase a tool because they know that they know the experience they're going to get, more or less.
Yeah.
So I really like that approach.
so how do you internally make that decision between this is an open source feature or a paid feature? What's the rubric?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we have like I would love to say we have like a perfect framework for deciding that. I think we generally like our default is we tend to make most things available on the open source unless we have a good reason to not make it available. So like if we think that there's like it's giving away, I talk very openly about this, by the way. I know like maybe people don't feel like, but in open source and cloud, I'm like I still try to remind our customers like, hey, like we're still trying to build a business here, but at the same time we want to be able to give like a valuable product to the open source. And so we try to be really, the most important thing to me is not what features, but how transparent we're being. So we try to be super transparent with folks. Even when we're building a feature, we'll let folks know like, hey, this is not going to be in the open source. This is going to be in the cloud version. And we will listen. We like do listen to people's feedback around like which ones they feel really strongly about. And most of the time, I would say even our self-hosted users have been like, yep, that's fair enough. I get why that wouldn't be in the open source. We haven't had too much pushback from people being like, like you really like screwed us with that feature not being in the open source. So I think we're doing okay with it. But like talk to me in like 2 years and I'll tell you if we've still got the balance.
I have a question. So earlier you were kind of saying that instead of your customer having to go into an entirely different system, like you're essentially bringing the system to them. With that in mind, like what's your like ideal user or client for Lightdash?
That's a good question. So the kinds of customers we work with span like a pretty wide remit, but like generally it tends to be like scale up companies that have like a data team, but they also just have lots of things going on all at once. So it's not like it's never clean, and they're kind of like we're doing lots of things. People need lots of access to data all at once, and we want like a balance between governance and accessibility. That's like I think that's like a constant trade off in data teams everywhere all the time. Is like how do you balance those two things? So like for us, that's kind of the sweet spot is that there is a data team. Like Lightdash is definitely a tool for companies with data teams, but it tends to be where the data team is like having to do far more work than the scale of the number of people that they have. And so it's like a tool of leverage. And the idea is that they want to enable as much self-serve as possible by embedding or, putting BI services into different parts of the company. So the most common ones we talked about today are people wanting to leverage it in things like Slack, in wiki tools like Confluence or Notion or Glean, that sort of stuff. So all those sorts of things. And that tends to be like a really good fit for us. Maybe the additional one is that like there's like maybe more than one data customer. So you have like end users, you have product teams, you might have data science teams, and you want them all pulling from like one source of truth. That tends to be like quite a central theme is that, data is getting to the point where they're like, we just need it all centralized, but we still want people to use it from one place. That tends to be like where Lightdash really works.
I'm curious to hear your perspective on the semantic layer right now in general, how it fits into the stack, how it's kind of, and how Lightdash is approaching it. Because, the last time that I worked closely with Lightdash, I remember building the metrics directly into it, and I remember enjoying the experience. It was tightly cut. It was good to have it tightly coupled with the BI layer. But there's different semantic layer tools out there now that are standalone. I guess my question is, how do you see the semantic layer as a tool bundled with your BI layer? Do you see that the two should go hand in hand, or is there some benefit to the portability?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that semantic layers have to be portable to be useful. Otherwise, it's not a semantic layer. I think it's just like the back end of a BI tool, which is what it is for most BI layers. And I also think that like the idea for portable semantic layer is something that isn't new, but it's something that is becoming more important now as like folks are thinking about all these different use cases they want to use. Fundamentally, though, I think in most companies, the number one use case for a semantic layer is BI. And then like number 2, 3, 4 would be like data science, maybe like now building their own custom like agents and all kinds of things as well. But what we've tried to do with Lightdash is everything to do with the semantic layer has always been open source. So Lightdash's semantic layer is like fully open source. We have like a fully built REST API for it. There's a Python client. So if you're using like a Python notebook and you want to call your semantic layer, you can do all of that through Lightdash. And we try to make it as clear as possible that we're like, we don't want to make any money from the semantic layer. We have like zero interest in it, but we think it has to exist and it has to be built for BI. When we started Lightdash, there wasn't really like a standalone semantic layer that was capable of powering like all the things that people want to do in the BI layer. So we had to build like our version of it, and we do maintain it, and it's still like an open source kind of tool that kind of exists. The way I describe it to people is it comes with Lightdash. Like when you use Lightdash, you get a semantic layer, but it's not exclusively for us. Like we are very much pro building integrations for other tools. We have folks internally who've actually used Lightdash's semantic layer to build integrations with other BI tools. And that's kind of the point of like a semantic layer that works. I think the standalone semantic layer as a product, there's a few people who are trying it now, and so there's like different levels of success. I think the biggest thing it affects is the companies that are interested in it. I think at a certain scale, a standalone semantic layer it's partly just like a buying problem. It's like another item you have to buy, another item you have to manage for your data team. At a certain scale, it makes a lot of sense where governance becomes more important, and you can have an entire team whose focus is like maintaining the semantic layer. But I think so I think it's like a scale problem rather than like fundamentally is it useful or not? I think it is, but I think it's like when you're a certain size, you just want it bundled, and then at a certain size, you want it a bit more unbundled, and then maybe at the most extreme end of like extremely large enterprise, you're like, I just want this to be a totally separate tool in its own box away from like anything else.
See, okay. And I think before this call, I didn't realize that the semantic layer you released was technically independent and could be connected with other services. So that gives me something to try out after this. That's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we just released the Python client for it like last month. It's pretty exciting. So it gives it even more firepower on top of the APIs. And somebody
Awesome.
actually built an MCP server for it. It's not built by Lightdash yet, but one of our community members built it and released it last week, and I was trying it out. It works pretty well. Yeah.
Well, so that's a good segue into one more question I wanted to ask you. Do you think that, and this is also related to semantic layer, do you think that with the rise of the LLMs and agents and things like that, will this shine a new light on the semantic layer and the value of having metrics defined?
I think so. It's funny. I was having this debate internally today with someone where I was like, I think semantic layers are going to become more important than ever because people are realizing that you can't throw LLMs just at the warehouse because you need a bit more structure than that. But at the same time, if you've used any AI tools in any other capacity, there's this blend of like system prompts that you kind of give to the models where you kind of essentially are creating rules for it, right? Where you say like, hey, like whenever someone asks this question, you should use this data set, or, you should use X, Y, or Z. And then it kind of opens up this thing of being like, well, is that part of the semantic layer as well? Like, should all that context, all those rules, should they be part of the semantic layer? Or is the semantic layer like just meant to be this pristine definition of like metrics and dimensions and like try to keep any other like metadata that's application specific outside of it? And I think like that is almost like the question that I see coming up a lot more now is like, as people are building more of these AI analyst services, it's like, how do you split out what goes into like a prompt that stays in the system versus like what should be pushed down to the semantic layer?
I see, because you may have, 10 people asking the same variation of the prompt. How many customers do we have? Is there a way to capture that? Are we looking at maybe a prompt layer on top of the semantic layer at some point?
Potentially. Let's not float it just yet. I think one source of truth is enough. But yeah, I think like that's like a problem that I see, an interesting one. I think it's an exciting one, but I can see it kind of becoming a thing where people are going to start thinking about, should this stuff all sit alongside those metrics and dimensions? Primarily if the main use case is going to become like LLM agent chat first rather than like ClickOps building charts, then there's a really strong argument for why it should live with the rest of the dimensions and metrics.
Cool. Yeah, those are all the questions I had.
Awesome. And then Chisholm, did you have anything else to add before
I know
we
that
wrap?
Lightdash integrates very easily with DBT. Are there other transformation tools that you're considering also like making it easier to integrate with Lightdash in the future?
Yeah, definitely. We started with DBT because I think back then it was kind of like the tool that everyone was using and was open source, and those were all things that I loved. But I think in the future, we definitely want to make it easy for people to connect whatever data transformation service they're using. So I know at the moment, There's a lot of people working with tools like SQL Mesh and Tobiko are doing like a really cool job there. And they're not the only ones. There are other kind of services out there as well that are kind of doing a lot more data transformation work. So I think like, yes, even there's another one I just remembered. Is it Dataform by Google? There's
Dataform on that's only for BigQuery. Yeah,
that's only for BigQuery. Yes, that's right. Yeah, they used to be a startup, and then I think they got bought by Google, and now they're like rolled into BigQuery. But yeah, so there are a few other ones, and I think like, yes, we definitely want to build integrations with them. I think for us, it's a bandwidth thing. Lightdash is still like a small-ish team, and so we have to like choose what we want to focus on. But we're seeing more and more requests for that sort of stuff, and our roadmap is dictated by our community. So I think as that stuff gets more popular, you'll see us rolling out those functions as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Hamzah, for joining us today. This was such a cool session. And if people want to stay in touch with what Lightdash is doing, where should they go? You mentioned you had a shared Slack.
Yes, we have an open Slack community, so I'd recommend joining that. And we just drop a lot of information about all the new features we're working on, all the things that are upcoming. If you're in person this summer, we're going to be at like pretty much all the conferences. So if you're at Snowflake or Databricks or Coalesce or Big Data London, and probably some others I'm forgetting, just drop by and say hi.
Perfect. We'll be at Coalesce too, so we hope to see you there.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to it.
Maybe I convince Stephen for Big Data London.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun one.
When is that?
It's in September, I believe. It's like basically ends up being like a month before Coalesce. That's usually like the line.
Okay. Well, perhaps we'll see you there.
September in London. It's a great time to visit.
Yeah. All right. Well,
awesome.
Thank you all again, and thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to link all the Slack channel for Lightdash and everything below. And also our information is linked below. So if you're looking for a data agency to help you with any of your data needs, we'll have some contact info linked below as well as our LinkedIn. And we so far will also be attending Stripe sessions if you are also in the world of Stripe and P2P payment systems, and we'll be at Coalesce this summer. So thank you guys once again, and stay tuned for the next episode of Tycoon Talks.